first speaker in tonight's lineup will be Mr. Peter Brun, MA. He's a science graduate from Cambridge, former share broker, former grazier, currency and commodity trader, investor, and currently treasurer of the H.S. Chapman Society. And he also tells me that he has written a book of limericks. So he is a versatile man. Versatile, that last bit particularly convinced me that he is versatile. And I'd like you to welcome Mr. Peter Brun, please.
Thank you very much. My talk this evening is going to encompass a few things. I'm going to be quite brief about UN Agenda 21 at ICLEI and so on, because I think a lot of you know about that. If you don't know about it, then I urge you to look into it. There's a stack of stuff on the internet from both sides. But I am just going to talk a little bit about climate change and sustainability, because they're pretty relevant to those that follow. Then I've got a little cameo section which is about what the Waverley Council has on its environmental action plan. Waverley was actually the first one I looked at, but all the others have got something pretty similar. I looked at Woollahra, Leichhardt, Bathurst, Newcastle, and finally Moree. The Moree one, I must say, was a little bit different from the others, but certainly those three metropolitan ones were very similar. If we go on, now I make no apology for this. I've drawn my information on this from a number of sources who tend to be on the sceptical side of the argument. But I have read quite a bit of the IPCC stuff, and there are certain things that I certainly agree with what they say. So now in 1991, ICLEI was set up, and the actual process in which all these things run is still rather confused in my mind, but ICLEI would appear to be the organisation that pushes through the agenda to local councils. UN Agenda 21 signed at the Rio Earth Summit by 178 countries, including Australia, ratified by our federal parliament in 1995. In 1999, it's quite interesting, this was under coalition government, and I tend to vote that way. They passed the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Act, which is pure ICLEI. ICLEI embraces climate change, sustainability and biodiversity. I was going to produce a handout of various books and publications and websites. I'm sorry I haven't done it. If somebody wants that stuff, if they see me afterwards or give their name to the desk, I can furnish them with that. I'm not impressed by IPCC, I have to say. And based on what I've read by Donna Laframboise in her book, The Delinquent Teenager, and Bob Carter in his, I think it's called Climate Change, The Counter-Consensus, the IPCC comes out pretty badly and could be described as mendacious, fraudulent, corrupt, brainwashing, and a sensorial gravy train. Now let's just have a look at a few graphs on the climate change thing. Now a lot of you will be familiar with this. It's the last 550 million years ago, and the significant thing there is that all larger life forms, both plant and marine, plant and animal, land and marine, developed during that period where you see the red line falling down to a very low level at about 300 million years ago. Now, that shows you that carbon dioxide was a great deal higher back in those times, and the great coal fields of the world, a lot of them were laid down in that period from about 350 million years ago to 250, roughly. I mean, we don't mind about a million years here or there, really, do we? You can see from that there are times when they move together, but there are times when they don't. Anyway, in terms of the Earth's history, carbon dioxide levels, according to this data, which is admittedly proxy data from radio radioactive isotopes and so on is at a very low level. Incidentally, one thing that's quite interesting, which I haven't shown there, you will see that at about 250 million years ago, sorry, I better stand by this thing. Carbon dioxide suddenly took a leap. Now, that coincided with the end of the Permian period, which was called the Permian extinction, where vast basalt fields were laid down in what is now Siberia, and I mean, more than 95% of life on Earth was killed. Now, the last million years, we are in a warm period, as you see, and most of the time, you have to admit, it has not been much fun. And I mean, as long as it doesn't affect us, but it is going to happen eventually. It's hard to imagine that carbon dioxide alone is going to save the situation. Now, is carbon dioxide at a high level historically? The answer is yes, it is. But should we be afraid of that? And the answer is no, we shouldn't, because the warming effect of carbon dioxide declines logarithmically. And from where we are now, every increment in carbon dioxide produces a very small warming effect. Apparently it never gets completely flat, but you can see that, it's pretty obvious. There are a few other matters. The computer models that are used. Computers are great things, and they've certainly helped research. But what computer models have relied on for a lot of their forecasts is what is called positive feedback, which is that water vapor, which is much the largest greenhouse gas, the warming effect of that is enhanced by increases in carbon dioxide. Now, according to David Evans, and I can give you his details, you can find them on the internet, but he writes quite extensively on this, and he says that using positive feedback is not supported empirically. Computer models, well, we know what lousy forecasters are. They can't forecast them a couple of weeks ahead or anything. Ocean acidification, Professor Bob Carter of James Cook University tells me this is a very complicated issue. He's had great difficulty explaining it to non-scientists. I'm not going to talk about it now, but I can give you information on that if you wish. Well, this is just a brief thing showing the greenhouse gases in order of importance. It's just more or less, as I said, water vapor is much the most important. Now here's the infamous hockey stick, and when I use the word fraudulent to describe the activities of the IPCC, this was a gigantic fraud, and it's been proved to be, and now they do not show it in the IPCC reports anymore. Just a little bit on the more recent history of the Earth's temperature. You can see that historically we're in a warm period, but by no means the warmest. Are cyclones increasing? No. We hear a lot about them, but it ain't happening. Just as a matter of interest, I was born in the county of Norfolk in England, and I have a rather interesting book here, which is about the Norfolk and Suffolk weather from about 1800, and I can tell you they had a pretty bad time in the 1800s. The 20th century was a lot kinder. CO2 is not a pollutant. Well, you all know that. It dissolves more freely in colder water than warmer. The ocean contains 50 times as much as the atmosphere, and CO2 is in continual flux in and out of the oceans. Ice core analysis shows that the Earth warms first and carbon dioxide in levels increase later, not the other way around. Submarines are air-conditioned at 7,000 parts per million. I don't think we've got too much to worry about at 400 parts per million. CO2 is a plant food. You can see along the bottom there, you've got this is obviously an experiment, and it shows you how much more plants grow when the carbon dioxide level is higher. We see these all the time. What you see is steam. If you look at the two what you would call smokestacks, which in fact come from the coal burners, there's nothing coming out. Of course you don't. Carbon dioxide is colourless, so also odourless and non-toxic. This is not quite up to date, this map, but I'll show you an up to date one in a moment. But it does show you how carbon dioxide is continuing to increase while the trend in temperature is, well, actually, quite frankly, it's all over the bloody place. But I mean, that's the nature of climate. It is all over the place. I mean, look at that. These are the satellite-based temperature. This is the satellite-based temperature record, and that's when it starts. It doesn't go back before that. But I mean, a lot of the smaller fluctuations are because there's much more land in the northern hemisphere than there is in the south. Who knows where it's going to go from here? Okay, that's all I'm going to say about climate change. You may disagree with me. Well, okay. Sustainability. Now, we hear some most extraordinary things about agriculture. Modern agriculture is a miracle. I mean, if you go back in time, farmers had an appalling time. They really did. And maybe they will again. But at the moment, they're meeting the world's requirements. There are a lot of things that are important. Now, I was brought up on a farm in England, and I can tell you that the land went from heavy land that had to be drained to sort of really nice loamy soils, and to very light land where shelter was important, so you had to have shelter belts and so on. These things, I mean, you know, the Greens agree with us on all these matters. There's no argument about them. There have been mistakes in the past, of course, but practices have been continually improving. And in that respect, I would suggest, and I'll talk later on this about what's happened to some of the farmers, that the carrot is much more effective than the stick. Australian soils have vastly increased productivity since the arrival of the white man. You go to India, like 50 years ago, maybe the population was 400 million. Today it's 1.2, and they're self-sufficient in food. You know, it's a miracle. Where there is food scarcity, you'll probably find there's foreign aid, corruption, ignorance, and malpractice. Israel, a dry, barren country, is a food exporter. Remarkable. In terms of the countryside, I mean, there are many parts of the world which have been settled for thousands of years. The land is fashioned by mankind, as is Australia. National parks. I love national parks. I do a lot of bushwalking. I think where there are fragile ecosystems like mountains, floodplains, wetlands, and coastlines, great places for national parks. But under the UN agenda, they are talking about 50% human-free habitat and 10% buffer. Now, what does this mean? Well, there are a lot of exotic plants in our national parks, make no mistake. Just to mention two, you've got blackberries and lantana, and they're out of control. And then you've got feral animals. They tell me there are 10 million cats in Australia. Well, I believe if you told me there were 20 or 5, it wouldn't make any difference. And then you've got fire and flood and storms. Now, this is a map of the US, as you can see, and that shows the planned areas of land use under the Sustainable Program, where man is excluded from 50% of the land. There's a 10% buffer, which is also basically human-free, and man is required to live in the other 40%. I'm not going to go into that anymore. There's a wealth of stuff on the internet. As I said before, the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act was passed by the coalition government. But what UN agenda about is green utopian idealism, which will turn Australia into a socialist state. Under Habitat 141, which is an area in Victoria in South Australia, I think a bit in New South Wales, there's a large area there which is going to be reserved for wildlife, land and corridors and so on, with unbroken chains of human-free habitat. Sounds wonderful, but I think that the costs and the problems that would be associated with that would be more than we reckon on. And it's also involved in large and takeover of large areas of private land. Who pays? Well, of course, the taxpayer pays. I mean, this locking up land and putting in managers and all the rest of it, is completely unsound economics. And we all know about the failure of socialism. It's been demonstrated time and time again. And why is the Earth so holy? I mean, is it the fate of the Earth to wind up as a useless rock in space like pretty well everything else? I'll leave a little bit out there. Oh yes, in terms of Agenda 21, there are now 8 American states which have banned or are in the process of banning UN Agenda 21. This is Habitat 141. You can see that red area there. That's the area that it covers. This is a more detailed map, but I'm afraid it's rather blurred, and I haven't got a key for it. I'm sorry about that. Now, I'm actually going to just leave it here for a moment and go to, if I can make this thing work the way I want it to, go to the Waverley Environmental Action Plan. Am I running out of time?
No.
Oh, good. All right, now, I know some of the people involved with the Waverley Council. They're Liberal-endorsed councillors, and Sally Betts has been there, is a nice woman, we go on well. I'm amazed. I'm absolutely amazed at this stuff. I mean, go and look at it. There's 50-odd pages of it. I'm flipping through this. Don't even bother to look at it at the moment. Well, there's a bit here. I don't know whether you can read that. You probably can't. I'll just have to go to the other little thing I've got here. Okay, welcome to the brave new world of green, sustainable, biodiversified Waverley. Well, these people are pretty keen to get us all believing this stuff. There's a lot in here about sustainability, education, and engagement. This is unbelievable stuff. And this is all based on fear of increasing carbon dioxide and runaway global warming. I mean, right at its very premise, it has got no basis. Look, none of us like rubbish. I walk a lot and I run a lot. Clean Up Australia Day was, what, a couple of weeks ago or something? It's rubbish everywhere. Within 2 weeks of clean-up, there's a big job. We agree on that front. Something needs to be done. But I don't know how it's going to be done. I mean, it gets enough publicity as it is. But, and we can't all police each other. No, I'll just go on a bit. As I said, this is meant to be the comedy section of it, and I think you'll find that there isn't a comedy in it. Well, this is quite funny, really, because you can see here, look, 30% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2020. And little old Waverley Warren saying, sure, I can fix that, you know. Of course, it will need the help of everywhere else, including a whole lot of foreign countries. So,